Hello, my name is Robert Cheadle. Today's presentation will focus on a project to determine staffing needs in the United States during flu season. The motivations for this project include the U.S. has an influenza season where more people suffer from flu as compared to other times of the year. Vulnerable populations are more likely to end up in the hospital. Hospitals need additional staff to treat these extra patients, and a medical staffing agency provides this temporary staffing. The objective of this project is to determine when and how many temporary staff the staffing agency should send to each state during flu season. A quick note, vulnerable populations are defined as people 5 years of age and younger and people 65 years of age and older. Based on limitations of the source data, vulnerable populations for this project are defined as people 65 years of age and older. When is flu season? Based on historical data provided by the CDC, a line chart was created to display flu deaths on a monthly basis in U.S. climate regions determined by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. As the visualization clearly shows, there is a clear trend annually where influenza deaths increase in each region. Flu deaths begin to increase in November, peak around December, and they appear to level off in March. Based on this information, the flu season across the U.S. occurs annually from November to March. Just a quick note, I'd like to point out that in December 2014, there was a large spike in flu deaths in the Northeast region as compared to other climate regions in the U.S. Further investigation may help to determine the cause of this event in the 2014-15 flu season. Where should staffing agency resources be allocated? This map displays each state's total vulnerable population. The darker shade of blue represents states with a higher vulnerable population. The states with the darker blue reflect a higher vulnerable population and also have more deaths due to flu. Here, California, New York, Florida, Pennsylvania, and Texas stand out. How many staff should be allocated to each state? This visualization can help us to determine how many staff to distribute to each state during flu seasons. Each state's vulnerable population and total flu deaths were broken down into a percent of the totals of the U.S. for each variable. If we use California as an example, the color brown represents the highest percent of U.S. vulnerable population at 11%. California also has the country's highest percent of flu deaths, around 9%. This can really help us determine how much of the agency staff to distribute to each state based on the state's volume of vulnerable population and number of deaths due to flu. Either one of these metrics or a combination of the two may really help the agency decide how it will allocate staff throughout flu season to each state. Once again, we see similar trends in Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, and New York. Some insights and recommendations based on the findings of this project include: the U.S. has a flu season which begins in November and ends in March. This trend can be seen across all states in the continental U.S. California, New York, Florida, Texas, and Pennsylvania appear to be the most in need of support during flu season. These states all have high total flu deaths and large vulnerable populations. How many staff to send to each state is a more difficult question to answer. Without knowing the exact resources available at the staffing agency, we look at each state's national vulnerable population and flu death percentages and get a good idea of how resources should be distributed amongst the states. At this point, it is suggested that further analysis is needed to make a more informed decision about staffing allocation by the agency. It is possible that not only deaths, but visits to clinics and hospitals be analyzed because deaths alone may not represent a state's need for staffing support during the flu season. For example, just because a state has a low number of flu deaths or makes up a low percentage of the nation's deaths due to flu may not accurately represent the volume and the need of hospitals and clinics in that state of people suffering but not dying from the flu. To determine the success of staffing allocation for future flu seasons, it is suggested that each state's staffing requests and workloads of agency staff be monitored during future flu seasons. This will give us a good idea of how accurate our deployment and allocation across the states at the staffing agency was in future flu seasons. If we find the numbers to meet the criteria of the project, we can safely assume that these are good key indicators of how agency staff should be deployed and allocated across the states during future flu seasons. Thank you.